Howdy boneheads, it's Password Dots, and today we're going to get into spooky mode and craft our very own dry bones out of socks. And if you're not watching this during the spooky season, I mean, you know, it's never too early to start prepping for Halloween, dress up like a sexy goblin, ha! This build is a little complicated at first glance, but there's no reason to lose your head. Oh god. Oh god, no. No, oh my god, is there a doctor? Somebody call a doctor, somebody please! A doctor, please, is there a doctor in the house? So, to make my dry bones, I've got one pair of knit light gray socks, one medium gray sock, one black sock, one light blue sock, some wheat colored felt, one pair of yellow buttons, a foam cup cozy, stuffing, and some colored thread. I've got this knit sock, which is a pretty fun texture for bones, getting rid of the ankle, and just taking a chunk out of that leg that I'm going to stitch up using the running stitch. Easy stitch to do. If you're not knowing, I'm here to let you know. Give you my stamp of approval, know what I'm saying, so pick this up. The running stitch is all about dipping your needle up and down through both sides of your fabric. It looks simple. It is simple. It's simply a good stitch. I flipped this sock inside out, though it's hard to tell. Now, it's important to always start off by anchoring the thread at the beginning of a stitch so it doesn't pull through. So I've knotted it up a little bit at the start, and then it's really easy to zip along the whole way around the top side of this piece. We're going the whole way around with this stitch, and what's cool is when we're done, we can just pull it tight to cinch it together. Then flip it right side out and stuff it up. This is going to be the base of my dry bone skull. I'm going to use the running stitch again on the open side to cinch that together as well. And then we've got to use another kind of stitch called the ladder stitch. The ladder stitch is done by crossing from one side of your seam to the other side, like the rung of a ladder. Then riding parallel, like the leg of a ladder, so on, so forth. It's very easy to do and super handy. This is a stitch that is useful when you're stitching from the outside of the doll because the tension created by this stitch pulls the seam tightly and conceals your stitches. So that'll hold this little nugget together. Looks a bit of a mess right now because I'm just playing sort of sloppy Susan on it. It'll clean up later, I promise. Now I'm taking another chunk out of this sock to form the bottom jaw. I cut out a bit of a wavy pattern for the teeth, and this is only the bottom half of the bottom jaw. So first I want to stitch the front piece up so it forms a point, and then splay it out onto another piece of sock and stitch around the perimeter, leaving it open at the widest part. The back of the jaw? The base? Anyway, let's flip this right side out using my chopstick to delicately push out each tooth and stuff it up. Really get into the grooves there. Okay, so with the bottom jaw complete, I'm actually taking some time to change my workspace. So let's segue and cue the charming sound of clattering cartoon bones! Much better. We're all settled in. While in between shootings I made the top of the mouth, it's the exact same thing as I did with the jaw, but it's bigger. And I ladder stitched both of those to the skull. Next up we need to make the eye sockets. I'm cutting out 4 equal sized rectangles and notching the tops with a semicircle. Each eye is 2 of these pieces, one for the back and one for the socket side. We want the pieces facing right side in when we stitch them up, because when we flip them, we want the stitches to be concealed. See, I didn't do that on one of them. Now I've got the seam allowance showing on the outside, which thankfully isn't a big deal in this case. I'm going to be able to cover that up nicely. Let's set those aside for a minute and pull out my black sock. Hanes. Got a nice painted logo on the front that we're going to avoid. Then I'm just going to cut 2 bullet-shaped pieces out while out of frame and use the ladder stitch to affix the black holes to my sockets. The stuffing for this will be between the black and gray sock. And normally I save the eyes for last, but I figured it would be much easier to stitch on the button eyes now. Sewing on a button is super easy. Just anchor in with your thread in the center of where you want your button, and loop through your buttonholes, dipping into the fabric each time you go under. And then it's a fairly easy task of stitching the eyes to the top of the head. Once I got both eyes attached, I used the ladder stitch to bring the eyes more tightly together. Alright, not too shabby. Let's work down to the shell. We've got another Hanes sock, it was a 3-pack, and I'm taking a wide cut out of the heel. Obviously, the heel is already in an appropriate shape for the shell, so I'm not going to try and stitch one together. The inside of the shell will be black, so I need to do this same shape with the black sock as well. and then stitch that together. Of course, the pieces should be facing right side in, so that when we're done stitching, we can flip right side out and the seams are tucked away. It's a pretty fun shape as it is, just being kind of a cup, but it doesn't have any formal structure that way, so we need to fill it with stuffing. Then we can close it up and move on to the shell markings. I barely started stitching along the top before I realized that would be a mistake to not map out my lines with a set of pins. There's nothing particularly fancy about the stitch I'm using here, but my thread is doubled up, so the stitch itself is thicker. It's just about making a bunch of loops in that very geometric soccer ball pattern. This was honestly one of the most time-consuming parts of the project. It took a lot of patience, a lot of thread, a lot of adjusting to get it looking right. And then there are the small details of the shell cracking, which I stitched on with my thread singled up, singled down. Either way. I came out with a pretty darn good looking shell. Though it's not complete yet. I've got to put the ridge around it, which I'll again pull out my knit gray sock for. It has a smooth, untextured style to the foot area that I thought was a good contrast against the knitted pieces, but still stood out against the shell. So I'm pinning around the shell so that the whole thing stays in place while I work around, stitching first from the inside, then stuffing and turning over itself to form a tube that I'll ladder stitch all the way around. But how will the skull attach, you ask? Well, I've got these fancy little magnets about the size of a watch battery that are really strong. I found these, but you can buy them at a craft store for cheap. I forgot to leave an opening to place the magnet into, though, so I'm just snipping a tiny little hole into the top of my shell ridge and placing the magnet inside. Then I can close the hole with the ladder stitch and tack in a few extra stitches around the magnet so I'll hold it in place. And for the back of the head, let's just cut a little circle off of the knit sock. Smaller than I intended, but should still work. And ladder stitch that over the magnet so it's secured to the back of the head. And now the pieces should snap together really nicely, or they would if I hadn't put one of the magnets in facing the wrong direction. So let's just flip that around, and there we go. That's looking nice. He's obviously not going to hold his head up right now, but the head will get support once we put in the rib cage. For that, we have the foam cozy. Taking some craft scissors, not our fabric scissors, we'll cut this right down the middle. And I ended up cutting wider than I should have for these, but cut 3 to 5 evenly wide strips. I've got 4. Then we'll put the notches into the shoulder holes at the top of the rib cage. There might be holes in the bottom too, but I really couldn't be bothered, so pull out that tan dress sock and the super glue and start applying some strips of tan sock that are bigger than you think they should be. We're going to trim them down to size, but it's easier to take away than to add. So lay those big old rib strips down there and tuck it all in nice and clean. Cleanish. I was more interested in getting this part over with than I was making every corner seamless. There's one more part to the ribs which we need, and that is the turtleneck thing, because he's a turtle. So I'm just taking another strip of tan sock and making a tube out of it, then gluing that to the top rib. Alright, all those are set, but before we attach them to the shell, I want to assemble the limbs. So I'm cutting out 8 rectangles from my knit sock and stitching them up, flipping them, stuffing them, tucking the opening into itself before closing it up. I'm attempting to create a bone shape on one end, which can be done by ladder stitching in a lemon pattern, like this. So here's your piece, right? So with our ladder stitch, we're starting small, going on up, going across, getting wider as we run towards the middle, like that, more or less. That pulls the middle tighter since there's more fabric being pulled into the seam. Oh, and there's also a 9th piece for the tail. It's made just like the rest of the bones, just with a point, and then with some black thread wrapped around to create the digits. Okay, so we've got all of our bone nuggets ready. Let's work on the gloves. I've pinned one of my blue socks where I want to cut, and this is a bit complicated, but the whole hand is going to be made by one single piece. I'm going to cut along the red center pins and then along the outside of the outer red pins. So I've got 2 squarish pieces. Then I'm cutting the bottom so I have a strip instead of a ring. Let's remove the pins, flip this inside out, and I'm taking the one side and folding it over itself. So basically, looking from the side, you see a Y shape. After pinning all of those folds in place, I'm going to start stitching from the top of the piece, the peak fold, and stop when I hit the bottom of the second fold. Then I'm going to stitch a Big Dipper shape along the width of the second fold. This part here, I'm going to cut it off, and what's left is going to be our thumb. I cut a little diagonal cut into that corner so that it flips more easily. Then I'm going to go in from the bottom and stitch right up to where the thumb lives. After that, stitch the other side straight up the whole length. The fingers can be made by stitching in these sort of skinny U's between them. Ah, skinny U, get it? Because he's just bald! So we'll cut the fingers free once we have them stitched out and we can get to flipping and stuffing. We know this part. I've made the gloves long so I could build the cuff into it as is. We can fold the opened end in on itself, stitch it up with a roll of stuffing inside like a stuffed crust pizza, and cinch it in there real good. Might as well stitch the arm in there while we're at it. The shoes, I don't have any special trick for. I'm just going to cut some rectangles, flip them inside out. I am pinning them where the ankle will go so I can sink the bone in there. And from there, it's a simple stitch around the perimeter. More curves on the front end than the back, just following the profile of our reference. Stuff that up! Now I couldn't make a boot cuff for the shoe from that same piece, so I've got a separate ring for that, which I've stitched up into a really bad donut filled with things you can't eat, and stitched that around the ankle. Of course these shoes need some sole, brother. I've got my orange felt for that. We'll double it up for a nice height, and trace our boots for the best pattern. I labeled the front of the soles with an F in case I got confused. So let's bring back the super glue and join our felt pieces together. And I'm out of super glue. Okay, so we have a new tube of glue. Let's get back into it. I'm making sure to really seal up the edges so that nothing peels away. And we can't forget the heels, so we need 2 more doubled up pieces of felt for that. After placing some dabs around the top of the sole, I ran out of super glue again, so I tried to get away with fabric glue, technically the adhesive I'm supposed to be using, but it's just so slow to dry. So let's hold this in place for a while playing some Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. Totally not an ad, but hey, you should get it. When we get tired of that, let's just pick up some more super glue and plow through the rest of this project. With the shoes done and the gloves done, we can assemble the limbs completely. I'm doubling up some black thread again and stitching the limbs together with some visible slack between them bones. Wrapping them gives some thickness to the joints, but they'll still end up really floppy. If you attempt this yourself and would rather have stiff joints, just pick up the slack, wise guy. Then, the limbs can be sewn onto the shell. I felt weird about this part, like there was no good way to put these things on there, but maybe it's just the limp nature of it. I don't know. Anyway, we've still got some gluing for the doing. Let's put these ribs on. Didn't end up with the spacing I wanted, but it is what it is. And then finally, we're gonna stitch on some teardrop shapes for the nostrils. And Dry Bones is up and at 'em. He's dancing, jingling, loving life, or afterlife, I guess. Overall, really satisfying build. There were some frustrating times. The ribs aren't quite what I would like or what I had imagined, and the proportions aren't very accurate, really. What I suppose I ended up with was a marionette without strings. I don't know, maybe I'll do that in the future. It is a really good rig for it. But anyway, that's all my time. I thank you so much for watching. I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Keep making stuff. See you next time.